Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Cap and Gown. I'm Rachel Phillips Buck, VP for Student Success at Fairs Resources, joined today by our president, Matt Boisvert. Hey, Matt.
Hi, Rachel. Great to be with you
How's it
today.
going?
It's great.
Good. I am a little bit froggy today. You know, in Texas, we had like 36 degrees yesterday. It's 80 degrees today, and this is where everybody starts to get sick. So
yeah, and I look out and I see that Lubbock is starting to blow in. It's getting pretty dirty out there.
Matt, I was thinking this is a really interesting time of the semester because we were talking to a school yesterday where it was snowing already. And then we're talking to some schools where they're like, oh, yeah, no, it still feels like, you know, summer here. So it's pretty interesting. It's like we start every call with some weather talk because there's just no telling what's happening, right?
Yesterday it was 33 degrees and I was like, man, we were so close.
Yep. Well, we just came back from a trip to Indy, which was very fun. We were at the CIC conference. We were there with Shauna and Callie, which is always lots of fun to be with our team members. We went and ate at Shapiro's cafeteria, which is a very old cafeteria in Indianapolis. I think I saw that Callie put a picture of our pastrami sandwiches up on LinkedIn. So that was really fun. Got to spend some time with my parents. Also, we were excited to see while we were there that Tinker Day started at Hollins. So that was really fun. One of our most favorite
Tinker
things
Day.
that people does. Yeah. Which, you know, we could have a long conversation about Tinker Day and just everything that it means. But it was a really good trip. I liked that trip. Good to see everybody and spend time with them. And
in fact, I'll come back to it, but I think for me, that kind of inspired today's topic for me.
Oh, okay. Well, one thing that I will tell you, which I was very worried because we had the president of NASPA speak to us for one of the opening ceremonies, or what do you call that? The
plenary.
And she did kind of her own State of the Union, which when she said she was going to do it, I was like a little bit anxious because I was like, what if I've been doing a terrible job of State of the Union? But I think she and I cover the same kind of stuff. Like she didn't say anything where I was like, oh my gosh, I need to tell people about that. So I felt a little bit like, okay, you're doing a good job, Rachel.
Doing a good job.
Yeah.
You are doing a good job.
For sure. I'm very excited about our episode today because you are going to be talking about a book that you have wanted to talk about for, I think, years at this point. It's kind of been on your bookshelf for a long time, Orbiting the Giant Hairball, which I will tell you, I'm pretty mad that I have to say that title.
Well, I think it's taken you this long to accept it being presented on or talked about. Because of the name, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, Orbiting the Giant Hairball. It's once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yes, that is true for sure. Okay. Let me see if there's anything coming up. You're going to Atlanta next week, so that will be nice.
I've got a trip to
doing some
president's conference in Atlanta, Emory.
And then we have one more SAC. We're going to be at SAC COC at the end of the year. So if you're going to be there, let us know. Happy to spend time with you. Otherwise, let's dive into the State of the Union.
Sounds good.
All right. You know, Bailey makes our slides for our State of the Union, and she was like, this State of the Union is a little bit all over the place, which I think is a fair assessment. There's a lot going on that I want to make sure we dive in.
And as we were doing the prep, you know, talking through some of the articles, and I was like, well, there's you cover a lot of ground. We're not talking about FAFSA. We're not talking about athletics. We're not talking about AI. Are we talking about athletics?
A little bit. But not NIL. What is it? NIL? It's not.
Yeah.
I always get NIL mixed up with the National Hockey League. So then I say it and then I'm like, did I say it right? But it is NIL, right? Not NHL.
True.
Yeah. Okay. All right. First of all, just some general news about tuition. I feel like this is always a question of like, what's the value of your tuition and how does it compare and what are we benchmarking to? So the average tuition and fees paid by students and their families after aid rose slightly for our 25-26 academic year, but it's well below our historic peaks. There was a pricing study from the College Board that said at public four-year colleges, net tuition and fees for first-time full-time students increased 1.3% when adjusted for inflation from last year. So that's about $2,300. This is incredible to me, though. That figure is down 48.3% from its peak in 2012, 2013. So
that's
that
kind
is
of amazing.
Yeah. At private nonprofits, net tuition and fees for first-time full-time students rose 3.7 annually. So that comes in at a cost of about $1,700. By comparison, that's down 14.6% from peak for private colleges in 2006 and 2007. So really interesting, Matt. We have talked before about and continue to talk about some price resetting, how people are thinking about what they say the price of their college is, even though nobody actually pays that. Like, what is the discount rate, right? All of those different elements are coming into play. But I think it's super helpful just to say, like, there is value in a college education, obviously, and it's getting less expensive. So interesting. Put that in your hat. Also, there's a really interesting article coming out of EdSource about shorter terms. So I love this idea. You and I have been talking about this for a really long time. The idea of going from 15 or 16 week terms down to 8-week terms. Schools that are doing that, it means your full load for an 8-week term is 2 classes, which I think is super helpful. What they're finding is that this is moving a certain kind of student towards graduation quicker, right? So we always talk about, are you a marathon person or are you a sprinter? And if you're a sprinter, being able to do an 8-week course where you're in, it's hard, but you get it done and you move on to the next thing, can be really helpful, especially if you're juggling things like caretaking or jobs or being online courses or whatever. Pretty interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so well, since I brought up athlete, I'm curious how a student athlete would feel about doing 8-week courses.
Yeah.
So they're more intense, obviously, but if that could be right. So part of the thing, this goes back, we've talked about it for a long time, but in that idea of a sprint, this focused energy on learning this discipline or this topic versus spread out over 5 and trying to manage, like, now where was I? What's the assignment and so if we just had a couple to be focused on, I wonder if that would be helpful for a student athlete, even in the middle of season, right?
Yeah. Well, it's pretty interesting. I mean, there's data. So this is coming out of the Mission del Paso, which is they've just changed to 8-week courses. Their completion rates rose 9 percentage points above district wide after they made this conversion. So that's really interesting. But you also have California, the university or California State University system abandoned quarters for semesters, saying that they move too quickly for students. It's not a good choice for their students. So it's really interesting to think about, like, maybe depending on the kind of student you have, depending on the kind of school you are, it'd be worth doing some of your independent study around that for sure. Odessa College shows course success rates have increased from 67% in 2010. Then they switched to 8-week terms, and that rose to 87%. So I think there's just a lot of questions around that, and I do think for sure it's student specific. One thing that is interesting in this article is that the faculty are saying this 8-week schedule has meant designing lectures with an urgent sense that every moment counts, which should be doing. If you feel like we have a lot of time to like meander and not get down to business, then maybe your courses should be shorter. right?
Yes, for sure.
Like we don't want to
So
cut
I've
things out that are important, but get to it.
so a couple of things on that. I don't know if you know this, but my MBA at Arizona State was on trimesters, and
Oh,
that was and so like maybe we try that. We can do 8 week, we could do 16, we could do 12.
yeah.
I loved it. It really I really felt like I was well I, for a lot of reasons, but that was cool. But I also have taught a 4 week class, and that was so I had two classes and during during these 4 weeks, and that was a nightmare. I think it was a nightmare for everybody because I, of course, felt like everything in my class was like I mean, it was like all the things that you needed.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't really wanting to cut anything out. It's brutal for
But I
everybody.
mean, there's a balance there, right? Because it's really hard. Sometimes, like if you're teaching a 3 hour course and you're like, I have 2 hours today, and then I don't know what we're gonna do, right? And
Yeah.
then sometimes if you have shorter periods of time, you're like, what do I have to cut out? Because I have so much content that I need to get in. So I think there's probably a good balance in there some way, but it's as we're talking for the rest of this episode about how to re-examine what you've just always done, that would
Yeah.
be an interesting thing to put in the hopper. I'm thinking about schools that we serve that are done at Thanksgiving, right? Which came out of COVID. They start a little bit earlier. They do their full semester. You go home for Thanksgiving and then you're home until you come back for the spring, which,
And
yes.
then they just really hope that you come back.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, lots of interesting things there. Okay. Another thing that I want to highlight for you is 4 ways to support military students. This article is worth the read
Happy
if you
Veterans Day, by the
Happy
way.
Veterans Day. If you have a lot of military students on your campus, they talk about things like college navigation. So, 2/3 of student veterans are first generation college students. So, that just speaks to the like, I don't even
Wow.
know what to ask. I don't know what to do. I need somebody to guide me in what I should be registering
That's
for.
shocking.
Yeah, really interesting.
Mhm.
Um, they're really interested in credit for prior learning. So they've done a lot of stuff. Can we figure out a way to give them credit for leadership, right? Or for teamwork or for communication or some of those things where you're like, you for
Yeah.
sure have
Well,
experience in that.
yeah. Supply
Um,
chain. Yeah.
right. Yeah. Right. Flexibility, just understanding that they have a lot of things that are competing for their time. And so being able to be flexible with them to make that really transparent so that everybody knows what's going on, so that you don't, you're not being hard about something where it's like, I'm in a different time zone. Can I have an hour extra, right, to get that done? And then the last one, which I really appreciate you and I've talked about for a long time too, is just a resource hub, a place, a dedicated place on campus for your veterans to connect. This article talks about, can you imagine an older student who won a Purple Heart and was diagnosed with post traumatic stress disorder, looking around at their 18-year-old peers being like, we don't have anything in common. I don't know what to talk about. We
Yeah.
don't have the same life experiences, right? And that kind of student being like, I have a place where the humor that I have connects with people. We have similar experiences. We can talk about real things, is the most important thing for success on a campus. So we've talked about that with commuters. I think the application to veterans is a great one.
Yeah. And thinking about I again took a trip. We once had at in our advising center, we hired he was a veteran from the Gulf War. Um, and and so he was a non-traditional student, but he was like, so he was a student worker, but he got everything done. It was incredible. So I was just thinking about like, wow, that's a resource to if you have that opportunity, if they're a full-time student, to bring them
For
in.
sure.
And then I was thinking about the students that I had who, were near a very large Air Force base. And so I would have students in my class from the Air Force base who were in the Air Force. And the difference in, I mean, everything, right? Like
Yeah.
they wanted to know exactly what the plan was. Like the syllabus had to be more precise. And also they would look around like they got their stuff done, and then they're looking around like, why is anyone asking for extra time? Like, this isn't real life.
Yeah.
So
But Matt, it's interesting. We have been talking recently about this sort of like, not, this is a bad way to describe it, but it's like this undercover language that kind recognizes kind, right? So like if you're from New York City, you recognize that in someone else. Sometimes like I'll just hear somebody say something and be like, I'm pretty sure they're from the Northeast, right? Or military, this is really true. There's just like all of these little symbols and language and approach to things that come from similar experiences. And if you haven't had those, it's very hard to try to replicate that and be like, oh yeah, I know what we're talking about. I have no idea what we're talking about, right? So even just that, like these unconscious signals that you're sending, we were listening to someone the other day, and they're like, you can tell by the way someone walks whether or not they've been in the military. That is something that you cannot fake. And yet it is such a signal to somebody like, oh, you and I have some similar experiences that we can talk about. So I think it's great.
Yeah. Good.
An article out of mainstream media, USA Today, which is called College Parent Facebook Groups and When Helicopter Parenting Goes Too Far, which you and I were laughing because I told you that title and you were like, they're not helicopter parents anymore. They're snowplow parents. And I was like, just wait for it. It's in the article. Just let me get there. Hold on. But this is really interesting because this is about, which Matt, you and I have not worked at an institution in a very long time. This was a thing when we were there, and it's just gotten progressively more invasive, I would say. This is about these Facebook groups where parents are like, hey, should I email my child's professor before the semester begins to introduce myself and open a line of communication? How should I handle my daughter's boyfriend visiting her dorm? Should I get his parents involved?
No.
Let us help you with that. The answer is no. So my generous take on this is a lot of times in these forums, they are first generation parents, which you remember we talked last week about how important it is to have parents be part of the conversation, make sure you're giving them good communication, right? All of those things I think are really important. But this article is written by Julie Lykoff-Hames, the former dean of freshmen at Stanford University. She has written a book called How to Raise an Adult, which shouldn't we all be trying to do that, please? And she basically is just like, hey, we've got overparenting, bulldozer parents, snowplow parents who are trying to actively clear the path for their students. The New York Times did some research with Morning Consult and found, I'm just telling you, this is what the article says. I find it hard to believe, but USA Today says 76% of parents of 18 to 28-year-olds have reminded their adult children of deadlines, including school deadlines, and 74% of parents made appointments for their children. That's incredible. So I think we have to walk this fine line, right, of like recognizing that is how people are parenting.
Sure.
And like how do we do a good job of acknowledging that? But then also, Matt, like this author says, a parent's role is we love you, we believe in you, you can tell us anything, we're a sounding board. If you want advice, we're happy to give it, but we're not going to impose our advice on you without asking. We're not going to swoop in and solve it because we know you've got this, which that communication of confidence, I think, is so important for students to hear, right?
Yeah. So I think, for our friends in higher ed, just thinking about all of that dynamic going on at home for our students. Yeah. And so that's a lot of pressure on the student also. Like, I think there's a desire to feel independent, right? And also some I don't know what you would say, interdependence here, or maybe some parents who are enmeshed with their kids,
Yeah, Matt, there's just a bunch of really hard stuff that I did when I was a young adult that if I could have found a way out of it, I 100% would have, right? If I could have said to my mom, will you please call the professor and figure out how I'm going to pass this class, I 100% would have. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that was not an option for me. So, all right, 3 more for you. Inside Higher Ed has a new survey revealing what's ailing young men. It's by Singal. It's a pretty small N, so it's only 1,000 young American men. But 77% of respondents aged 16 to 28 said they spend at least 5 hours a day online. 48% said they socialize in person between 0 and 5 hours per week. Nearly half said they have 2 or fewer friends, with 11% reporting no friends at all. The largest share of respondents, 27%, identified financial stability as their top priority, followed by mental health. 23% named financial stress as the biggest challenge. And 57% of the Gen Z males surveyed described their mental health as fair, poor, or very poor. One more for you. While 53% of young men said they have a role model, mainly their father, 39%, a friend, 22%, or their mother, 21%, 40% could not name anyone that they turn to for guidance. So, this question of like, who celebrates with you, who would you talk to? If you have 40% of your young males on your campus who are like, I don't have a person, we've got to solve that, right? Anyway.
So yeah, that's, I think, very eye-opening. I just had lunch at a university with a friend of mine in their cafeteria yesterday, and just watching him go around. Well, he lives in one of the new res halls.
Yeah.
He's a support family for that res hall, and we were just talking about that. And I told him that question and how what he's doing, building those relationships, like the number of students in that res hall who would put him down, him or his wife down, as like, that's a person I'd celebrate with. And I was telling him, that's good work. And he said, and then there's the other side of it, which is who will mourn with you or cry with you, or be there for you in the hard times. I think, right now I'm the thing. I'm always thinking this time of year, one thing that happens, and it always happens right now, the new Call of Duty gets released, and you can see, and you just see your class, all the males in your class disappear. They're exhausted. They stayed up playing that, and it's like, man, I don't know why Call of Duty has to release. Obviously, it's because Thanksgiving, Christmas, right? But come on, it's there's a lot of distractions right now for our students. Keeping that in mind and paying attention, it's just kind of critical right now.
Yes. Okay, I told you said I wasn't going to talk about athletics, but I kind of am.
Okay.
The Chronicle has an article that's called "A Sports Major May Be Coming to a Campus Near You." This is worth a full read. It's about Southern Virginia University, where they have a sports performance major, not sports management, not sports communication. It's not exercise science. It is sports. So students who are in a competitive sport are allowed to pursue this major. The idea basically is that sports are worthy of study in and of themselves, and that perhaps a major in sports is an academically rigorous way to reconcile the two halves of a student athlete, that we're not siloing those out, but actually we're combining them into this very specific study of sports, which I think is really interesting. They make the argument that you have practicum for music, you have lab time, or what is that, studio time for art, where you're practicing this thing. And yet we don't allow our athletes to have that same kind of practice. Like, they don't get credit for that. And the idea is maybe that we need to re-examine that. So the foundation of a sports major is not that sports is a conduit to learn math or science or sociology or leadership, but actually that it's a valuable thing to study. So Matt, it's really interesting. Their program description for sports is performing well in sports requires physical virtues such as strength, speed, agility, and moral virtues such as courage, self-discipline, fair-mindedness, and good judgment. The sports major cultivates these virtues in students through a reflective participation in the study of sport. So I kind of really like that. They have things like the philosophy of sport, including the nature and value of play, game fairness, victory, spectatorship, self-knowledge, and ancient Olympic ideals. Things like excellence in sports and life, how to design and habits to improve one's athletic performance and quality of life. Includes the study of the role of physical and moral virtues in human happiness. And then they have things like sports analytics using Excel, or sports marketing, or successful coaching. So there's a lot, as you can imagine, of unhappiness with this. It's very hard to get it on a campus, but I think the more you dig into that, I think there's some real value there.
Yeah, I took a whole trip. So, I just had this conversation with a friend of ours at the who's a part of the CIC, Council for Independent Colleges, and we were talking about, what do you do when 70% of your enrolled males are athletes?
Yeah.
What do you do? And like, how would you change the structure and everything for to support those students? And this seems like, so then I took this whole trip of, there are music conservatories, and there's a whole program for that, and that's not weird. That's an expectation. And I imagine that, like, in LA, there's probably like a film industry,
Of course, yeah.
major, and there would be a whole
Cool.
lot around that.
Yeah.
And if we just look at sport as entertainment, and how do we like music? So I took a whole trip because I was totally not sold on this idea
I know.
until, just kind of thinking through, well, what could I do? And as a student, if I had been able to, I don't know, spend time designing playbooks, and really, like, understanding the evolution of football offenses and defenses. That's fun to
Yeah.
me, right?
Yeah, Matt. I mean, the two things that makes me think are, first of all, one thing in this article is students saying, when I learned I could have that as my major on this campus, I decided not to enter the transfer portal, which I think is really, really important, where you say, this campus is specifically built for you. Yes, you can go somewhere else, but you can major in sports here, which I think could be a tool, right, to help us with some of our athletes.
If an outcome can be connected to, a future job, like, okay, I mean, could I be quality assurance on a football team or a soccer team, or
Well,
do
yeah, the other thing I was going to tell you is, you think about all of these shows that show you behind the scenes at the NFL. Those guys are smart. They
oh yeah,
study hard. They pay attention. They're good team members. They have high value, right? Like, there's just a
yeah.
lot of stuff that goes into the highest level of sports that's not just like, let's go play a game, that actually could have some really, really important learning around how to do that well. So I think we have to, I know it's not going to be popular, but I think there are some schools for whom that would be a good pursuit. At the very least, they're talking about schools that have a certificate in sports, which is like, here's the 5 things that we wove into your sports experience on this campus.
Yeah, I think that could be helpful. And I, as a college student, probably would have found that some of those topics to be interesting,
Yeah.
especially like the analytics of, I mean, Moneyball kind of analytics of,
I mean, they could play your GM game. That would be so helpful. Like, what's your strategy? Okay. 2 more. I'm sorry we're going long. Bailey is right. There's a lot going on.
You know why we're going long?
Why?
Because you don't want to talk about the hairball, but that's fine. That's fine.
Whatever. All right. Gwen and Mercy, who we have the privilege of serving, has just set up a crime scene house for student investigations,
so awesome.
Which is amazing. This house on their campus used to house the Sisters of Mercy.
Okay.
Now they have set it up. It's a 3-story house that has these various rooms staged for experiential learning for their forensic science students. So they have like the blood splatter room, and they have the carpet laid down where you cut out pieces and you use luminol, and you're like, what kind of thing is glowing here, right? They have they have like couches that they cut apart as they're trying, like, I just love it so much. I think it's such a great example of being like, how do we make this come to life for our students and give them an experience that is incredible? This kind of hands-on learning, I think, is great. So I wanted to shout them out. And then the last article I have is about the University of Austin, which is a very conservative school out of Austin. There's a lot of people who don't like it. There's a lot of people who do like it. What I think is interesting is, Matt, you remember we've talked about Hope College for a long time. They have this goal of no tuition. Their idea is that they're going to basically pay it forward, right? So you go for free, and then when you graduate, you're going to use the money you make to give back, because you're going to be such a devoted alumni that you want students to have the same experience graduating without debt. This is very, very similar. They just got a donation of $100 million towards their End Tuition Forever campaign. Their plan is they want to raise $300 million to become an endowment so that they can invest early in putting their students through without any federal money or out-of-pocket money. And then those students will graduate and give back. And then you've started this perpetual cycle where you just have everybody who wants to give students that same experience. So they're not accredited yet. They have a couple of years in their future there. But I think it leads into our conversation really well, which is, if you were starting from scratch and making it up to be whatever you wanted it to be, what kinds of things would you build into your new college or university? So I think it's really interesting to see some of these innovators who are taking big chances and long-term goals to try to fix this problem of students graduating with debt that they can't, that just continues to grow, right? So pretty interesting. We have to keep an eye on that one.
Yeah, what I like is that there's this pursuit for like different. Let's
Right.
and well-funded different a lot of times disrupts.
Yeah.
If it's good, it can be disruptive and make everyone better. So,
All right. Well, that is the State of the Union,
oh yeah.
which means we are fortunate enough to be able to dive into orbiting the giant hairball.
All right. So oh, you have more?
No, I was going to say, can you start that conversation off for us?
All right. So this is the book, Orbiting the Giant Hairball by Gordon McKenzie.
Well loved by you.
Yeah.
Got
Yeah.
good sticky notes in.
Actually, this is my second copy because I let someone borrow my first one and it never came home.
That's how it goes. Yep.
That's how it goes. But that's okay. Someone needed it and loved it. And hopefully they remember that I was the one who shared it with them.
For it. Yeah.
But here's the deal, Rachel. I'm thinking about so as we started off, conference season, this is a time of year where it's like we've gotten through a lot of the first semester, right? In a lot of cases, there's a lot of budget conversations that are coming up on our campuses, like what trying to get money to support your work, and so there's just a lot going on. But as we go to conferences, the thing that I keep hearing, I can hear you, Rachel. How's it going? I muted you. No, I put you on mute. Okay. You want to come off mute? Okay. All right. So as I'm going to conferences and we go to different sessions and we hear plenary speakers and there's a lot of like fueling of innovation and doing things that are you know, unique and creative and bringing creative power to your role and to your campus and how to have influence on your students. And and I keep thinking about how do we help our people overcome what is true about our institutions, which is that there's a giant hairball, which I know Rachel hates that as a phrase, but I want to kind of talk through that. So I want to start off. The reason why this book really resonates with me is when I was in my MBA program, Gordon McKenzie. Uh, this book was introduced to me my second year, but before my second year, I did an internship at a Hallmark Cards in Kansas City, and Hallmark is like super creative, a fun family brand, like just a perfect. It was just going to be a perfect opportunity. And then I had that internship, and I was just pretty frustrating. And when I came back, I was in a class, and a guest speaker came in and was talking about leadership and creativity, and he talked about Gordon McKenzie and his book, Orbiting the Giant Hairball. And so I had to get it. I went and found the book and was able to start understanding why I was so frustrated in my role as an intern at Hallmark. And so I think I just want to start off with, in this book, he's Gordon McKenzie was the head of creative at Hallmark, and he worked there for 30 years until the day of his 30th year, and then he quit. And so then he kind of unpacks what his experience was being in this, what he thought was a very creative environment, and then um, just what he saw as a giant hairball. And he starts the book off and he talks about how he would go as an artist, he would go and he does a lot of sculptures, and he would go and talk to students at schools about being an artist. And he would start with kindergartners, and he would meet with each grade level, all through from kindergarten through sixth grade. And so with kindergartners, he'd say, "Hey, um, so I'm an artist. How many of you are artists?" And he said, all the kindergartners raise their hand. Yeah, I am. Everyone's super excited. And he'd go grade level by grade level to, uh, then he'd get to sixth grade, and he'd say, I'm an artist. How many of you are artists? And he's looking at these timid sixth graders, and he can see a couple who are just kind of barely holding their hand up to say, I'm an artist too. And what he's highlighting there and actually says to them is, what's happening at this school where all of the artists are leaving by the time they get to sixth grade? What's going on? And his whole point in the book is, sometimes we're creating an environment that makes it hard to be creative. And a lot of times it makes it hard to be seen or want to be seen as creative. And so that is the beginning of the book. But the for me, the thing, when I think about a giant hairball, and I know, Rachel, that is like not your favorite image, but I want to just kind of talk through what that means to him. And so, Bailey, you might have a graphic there. This is from the book. And so you can see in the middle his little squiggles. Now, one thing I'll say about Orbiting the Giant Hairball is that if you get it, you will see it is full of creative doodles and illustrations, and Gordon McKenzie, who's an artist. And so, but basically, what he's saying with the giant hairball is, in the center, with every organization, you have in our society, whether it's what we've just seen, Rachel, with our government, or looking at our institutions like higher ed, or our even at Ferris Resources. What you have is like, you first did a thing and it worked, and so you held on to it, and then another thing, and these, just like any hairball, one hair adds to another, and then pretty soon you have this giant mess. But what it is a bunch of successes and things that you held on to, processes and ways of doing things, and all of that then starts becoming a mass of like this is what it is to be in this environment. This becomes corporate normalcy. At the center of the hairball, like this is our culture. And at a university, you can imagine, I mean, think about universities, higher ed, going back to Oxford, been around a long time, and all of the different pieces that today have added up to what higher ed is. And for many of us, it's like when I started at my university, I was just wanting to move. I was wanting to get things done, and had a lot of ideas, and and uh, and then it's like, well, I don't understand the resistance to this, right? So,
Yeah,
Rachel, I don't
so
know if
one
you
thing
talked or
that I think is really interesting, Matt, is when you were explaining this to me, I was saying, I feel like it's kind of like a spider web where it's like in the very beginning, there's like this clear, like, oh, that's a spider web, right? And then you just keep adding more and more and more. And you were talking about the cave where there's like a billion spiders living in it, and the spider webs are all like tangled up together. And pretty soon it just feels like a mess, and you miss the actual structure it provides, and it just looks like this very tangly, messy thing that you could get stuck in forever, right?
yeah. Yeah. So the biggest challenge is you have to be able to understand that that just is that there is going to be this hairball or this web, this thing that created the organization that you're a part of. I mean, if you think about Hallmark cards, so Gordon actually goes through the history of the founding of Hallmark cards and how Joyce Hall, J.C. Hall put together, a business, and he had success, and he wanted to continue to repeat success, and so these are the practices to repeat success. And then when he has his sons, he teaches them like these are the things to do, and that starts creating this hairball. And you want to have you. I mean, we want to be close to a successful organization. The problem is what Gordon was saying is when he got promoted, he realized he's like the chicken who looks at you, when you draw a line of chalk, and a chicken becomes kind of mesmerized by it, almost hypnotized by it. And he's like, when I got promoted, I was so focused on this organization's way of doing things that I started adding more to this big hairball. And what we actually want to do is recognize it and appreciate it and orbit it. Like we need this thing, but I need to just orbit it and occasionally come in and land, and do the things that I need to do so that I keep my job. But then I need to get out of all of the junk. Now, you can imagine why this really resonated with me, right?
Yeah. I was just gonna say, as I'm thinking about this, the 2 points that I wanna highlight there are, first of all, this is like U100 and first year experience, right? Where just there, you just keep adding more and more stuff, and there's more and more stuff, and there's more and more. And it's like Stephanie and Megan were saying last time we were together. It's like after a while, you don't even know what's in there anymore or why it's in there or what, right? It just gets to be a big ball of stuff. But also, Matt, I really appreciate like, it's not called flying off from the hairball. You do have to orbit it. There's two parts. There's like this thing that happens, and then there's how you negotiate your staying in the pull, staying close enough to be able to be part of that thing without getting overwhelmed with all of the junk that's in there. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. So, one thing that he talks about going back to these uh, all the artists in the school who are disappearing. What one thing he's just pointing out is like, at that school they don't mean to, but they're creating an environment in which it's safer to to be, just kind of hide in this all of these processes. It's just safer. So all of that, and the reason why I want to come back to like why I wanted to talk about this is we like go to conferences, go to your accrediting conference. People, we need innovation in higher education, and when you look at things like everything you talked about with State of the Union, a lot of things that we talk about are schools that are being innovative and schools that have gone away because they didn't have an edge of innovation. We obviously with AI, we need to figure out, you know, what the way of, I got to put you back over there. Sorry, but like, how do we manage this with AI? How do we bring innovation to our work, especially with the kinds of students who are coming that we need to recruit and enroll into our school. So that's kind of with all of this, like we have to recognize what exists. We have to see it as a resource, but not a place that we want to hide in. We have to continue to be creative if we're going to be innovative. So
Yeah, I was just going to add to that I think um, we're not going to dive into this part today, but I do think there's something about reassessing what's in that tangled mess. And Matt, you know, we always say in higher education, we are, first of all, like you said, it's an institution. We've always done things this way forever and ever and ever, right? Which makes it harder to change. But also, I think that we're very eager to add new things. And we don't always do a great job of going in and being like, that didn't work so great. Let's take that out. We need to change the way that we do this, right?
right.
So that I
Yeah.
think is an element that is so important, that yes, things, the longer they've been around, the messier they get, the more tangled they get, the more complicated they get. And also we can come back and say, let's take a look at this and decide whether or not it's working. So I think we don't have time to dive into that piece, but I think it's helpful to say for higher education.
Yeah, I think that's like ultimately this idea of orbiting all of the policies and all the procedures and all these things that have been around forever. The idea of orbiting is just being original, bringing your creativity. AI is not going to solve it for the university. You are. Your creativity is going to help your institution. It's breaking rules, and Gordon has a lot of great stories about that and things that he had to overcome at Hallmark, the most creative, place. Not really. Obviously, that's what the book's about. And how to experiment and bring that, I think, thirst for innovation, and also surround yourself with people who appreciate that, which is a really important part of it. And he talks about he had a boss who was the head of his creative division, and his name was McCloskey. And in McCloskey, one thing that I think McKinsey would say is McCloskey held back the hairball from infecting his team. And so he had Gordon had a leader who kind of stood between the creatives and the bureaucracy and the policies and all of that, and just like, hey, trust me, I've got this. You guys do your thing. Don't get too carried away, or you're gonna get out of orbit. I've got to reel you back in occasionally. And so McCloskey was really great at helping them kind of navigate this, and helped Gordon see how important that is. So in that, I guess the key point for me is the role as a leader in when you see a creative person, how you should empower them and protect them from all of the junk, you know, that sometimes, yes, we need to go into a meeting, but when we have, I don't know, a committee that meets to talk about another committee, and it's just this perpetual committee, you know, cycle, that isn't actually innovative. That's not
Yeah.
doing anything.
So, Matt, I just want to say that part of the work as a leader is the willingness to dive in. There is a protection part, right? Like you stay there and I'm going to dip into this thing. And I was telling you, I just had a meeting with somebody the other day at a school who was like, basically was like, okay, I'm going to meet with Rebecca And I'm going to understand why this way of doing something is the best way of doing something. Help me understand that. And then I'm going to dive into this hairball where there's a whole bunch of junk going on. And I'm going to say, I understand why that's important. I understand why that's set up that way. Let me make sure I'm listening to you. Let me make sure I understand what you need. I see what we're trying to solve. Here's what we're going to do. Right. And then it's almost like in Princess Bride, when he jumps into the quicksand, right? You jump in and you do all this stuff. And then you come out and you're like, okay, I need a break from that. Now I'm going to continue to stand between my people, and just all of that, just work that has to be done in the middle of bureaucracy. And I was thinking, you and I have talked for a long time, since the beginning of Ferris, about the idea of being creative with a gun to your head, which is impossible. I was telling you, there's a great episode of Parks and Rec where the main character has had this genius idea and she saved everyone. And then they're like, okay, what's the next idea? And she's like, I don't have anything. I don't know what to do. And she's stressed about it. And there's all this pressure. And her boss is locks her in a hotel and is like, you need to take a nap. That's what I'm going to do for you. Right. And then she comes out refreshed and she's like, okay, I have all of these ideas. But when she's living in this place where she better be creative or all her friends are going to get fired, that's impossible. You cannot do that kind of creative work under the gun with a lot of pressure, which I think is really important for our listeners to hear.
Well, I appreciate that, because, Parks and Rec is starting to really, I'm starting to become a big fan of it. Right. And related to that, what in the book, what Gordon McKenzie is talking about is, and we've talked about this with slow productivity, but it is this idea of having to go away. And a lot of times, even, certainly at Hallmark or in corporations, but certainly in higher ed too, where people are just expecting the results and they don't understand that. So Gordon's metaphor in this is like, hey, the cow produces milk because you let them go out into the pasture and chew on the grass. And you have to understand, the milk comes from them being out and being able to grow that way. And that's kind of what, I'm blanking on his name, what he does with Parks and Rec, where he's
Ron
like, I'm gonna where Ron Swan how do I blank on Ron? Where Ron locks her, like, hey, you can't leave. You've got to rest. You need to go and uh, let your brain rest and produce the next ideas. So that's a great, this idea again of being able to articulate. Again, we've said a lot of this on slow productivity, but being able to articulate, no, my team needs to go out and we have to get away from all of the walls or the screens or the spreadsheets. Right, we have to go and be with students, and all of that time with students is where we're going to get ideas that are going to help us be innovative.
Yeah. So I think when you and I were talking about this earlier, there's a mindset around retention specifically, which is we have to increase retention. So do these 50 things. And what I think is really nice about this idea of relational retention and what we teach our schools is, if you will do good work with your students, retention will increase. If you will be present with your students. And you remember, Matt, we had a really long conversation about slow productivity in this idea of what are you producing? Because I think it makes us uncomfortable in higher education to say we're producing something, but we landed on we are producing whole educated students, good citizens of the world, right? And that is not a wave the magic wand and produce them. That is when you see me in my office sitting with a student for an hour talking about important things, that is this slow productivity approach to good production. And we cannot rush it. And you can't say, work faster at that, right? Or I expect these results, but I'm not going to give you the time for it. You can't do it, because the output is directly related to how you take the time to create this thing that is of value, right?
So Gordon talks about this idea that in organizations, or he calls it a corporate personality disorder. But I guess my question to you is, if like, do you see this the same way that I do, where there's a lot of pressure, but there's not, but the university is not giving the time or the resources, right? They're they're not setting up a culture for so like he says, the organization officially asks for new ideas while covertly subverting implementation of those same ideas. New ideas are deemed fundamentally uh, unseemly by the same authority that asked for them in this first place. And so it's like the idea that student success is our top priority, and then they cut the budget, or we're going to um, tout how we have academic support, and then they cut all of their tutoring, right?
Yeah, and I think I don't know, Matt, there's this experience where it's like, you ask for suggestions and someone says something and you're like, okay, don't be crazy though. Right?
Yeah.
Like, what innovative things can we do? Well, I'm thinking again about Stephanie and Megan being like, well, one innovative thing we can do is our students are not getting their financial aid packages done. So we're going to have our financial aid counselors come to all of the U100 classes. That's 37 of them. And they're going to do this programming for 37 of those. And then someone's like, but don't be crazy, because we're definitely not going to do that. What else could we do that's more like similar to what we're used to and what we would expect, right?
Like,
And
hey,
so there's just this
you came
place
up with
where
an
you're
idea
like,
that,
that's
yeah,
crazy town, right?
right. Stop coming up with ideas that aren't proven, that aren't captured in a little hairball. That's that takes me back to the reason why I love this book, my experience at a
I
at
can
a
I just want to add to that. I think a really good question for our listeners, because Matt, you're such a creative person, and I think anybody who knows you would say one of the things you do really well is totally ignore the well-worn path, right? Like you're just like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to go over here and do this, which is really helpful in a leader, especially in a startup company. But I will tell you, there are a lot of people who are like, I would never do that. I have no interest in that. I want to follow somebody who's going to give me a new path, but I actually don't. Being a creative person like that does not resonate with me at all. So one of the questions I would ask our listeners, because I think this is the way that you can understand how this feels for you is by pairing your capacity and interest in innovation and creativity. So I would say 100%. If we can try to do a new thing, I want to do a new thing, right? How would you answer that? Some people are like 0%. I just, tell me what needs to be done. But that paired with, how does your institution or where you work, how interested are they in that? You have some institutions that are like, never, no, I don't ever want that. I want you to do what I said to do the way I said to do it. Stop thinking about it. Like your experience at Hallmark, stop having ideas. This is what we're doing, right? And then you have some institutions where I can come in and pitch, like, could we just try this one time? And they're like, yeah, let's try it. Let's see how that works. So I think that pairing is really, really important to understand your experience.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was like, on both sides, it can help explain for our listener why you're frustrated. Either you're in an environment where no one is interested in innovation, and you're just like, feel like you're just alone, and really you're not even really orbiting, right? You're kind of in this chaotic, frustrating place. Either you're so deep in the middle of this ball, or you are just so frustrated no one's listening to you, right? And I
Yeah.
think,
So can you talk? I want to move. We have two pieces left that I want to talk about. Can you explain this idea of the difference between sort of a hierarchical organizational structure and what he talks about, the plum tree? And then I want to end with just some action items about like how you can go through and put some of these things in place. Can you talk about the structure?
yeah. So So one thing that he breaks down is like when you look at typical organization, it's a pyramid as he describes it, and he's like pyramids are tombs, and that's like literally like people are inside that. So Gordon's pretty pretty fantastic. But what he's saying is like, and so we're used to a pyramid. But what and so you've got a person at the top, and they're telling you on a clear day, I can see everything, and I know where we're going, and it talks all the way down, and the people at the bottom are like, hey, what do you see? And everyone's just trying to climb up to the top, and there's just not a lot of coordination. And so his reframe is a plum tree, and what he's trying to cast is, if we could look at our organization, and that could just be like your department, right? Like, but if we could look at it and say, okay, we're going to start with a plum tree which is living, and as a living organism, all the resources are coming up from the roots, so it's financially healthy. The trunk is supportive. So the trunk is the support for this tree, and that is like leadership. So resources to leadership, to the branches, which are like your directors or department chair, you know those who are in charge of your office, maybe you. And then ultimately, if you look at this analogy of a plum tree, the fruit, that's the people who are doing the actual work with the students. And if we could look at the fruit and say, like, that's the moment of truth, what a student experiences. Like, all these things have to happen at our school. We have to have all of these different pieces, but what we're delivering to the student is this fruit. And is it good fruit? Is it healthy fruit? And so that's his
Yeah,
analogy.
I mean,
It's
Matt, it goes back to your enabling the promise, right? Which is this, like, how do you resource what we're actually trying to produce, what we're
Yeah,
actually
for
trying
sure.
to do? How are you resourcing that? What like what is the expected fruit of your tree, right? Which is telling the promise. And then how do you enable that so that actually in that moment of truth, they're getting what they think they should be getting.
Yeah.
So, can we do our action items? I have 3 that I'm gonna do, and then you can do the rest of them.
Okay.
Um, I think the first one is, you and I have talked about creative partners. In this book, they talk about creative renegades. He talks about being part of the like crazy ant division, which I love that idea. Like, I want to be part of the crazy ant division, which is like people who do all sorts of things, and it's always new and unexpected, and you know what's going to happen. And like, how do you find those kinds of partners who are in for yeah, let's try it and see how it works. I think that is so
Yeah.
important. We always say you're going to have people who are black hats, who hold up the hand, who say, here's the reasons you can't, right? And all of that. But you want to find people who are going to be creative problem solvers for you. The next one is protect your quiet time. And I would say this is twofold for our listeners. This is quiet time where you are investing in your thinking and your processes, because the outflow of that then is that you have quiet time with students where you're taking all of those things that you've learned and you've thought about and your innovations and your creativity, and you're pouring those into students and providing them with something that eventually is going to bear this really amazing fruit. So I love that one. And then the last one, which you remember, I forget the name of the book we talked about, where it was like how you listen to other people. Listening to other people is really important. Do you remember the name of that one?
I don't.
Where he was talking about this idea of compassionate emptiness, that we don't show up to talk to other people by being like, here's what you should be doing, and here's what I think about this, and right, that actually you show up listening to what they have to say. Seek, yes, thank you, how curiosity can transform conversations. It's such a good practice to show up, and I have this sometimes where I'm so future oriented that someone's like, here's an idea, and I'm like, that's dumb, we're not doing that. And then what I have to do is go back and be like, hold on a second, why did you think that was a good idea? What are you trying to accomplish? What's important to you? Why do you think that's going to improve our work? That showing up and just being empty and receiving what other people are saying to you means that you're not saying like, no, that's not part of our process. You're actually allowing other people to inform that innovation. And I think all three of those are so key to this process.
Yeah, Gordon talks a lot about that last one and how important it is to hold space and not shame or shut down creativity, especially for those who are not typically adventuring into creativity. Like this is very risky for some to do, to speak out loud about something that they, an idea. So I think that one so thank you, Rachel. A couple of things is not everything matters. You don't have to battle everything. You don't have to fight over every policy. Uh, the ultimately, when he talks about the hairball, and we're talking about the fruit, in this question of does this serve my students or does this serve some policy org thing that happened in 1906? You know, like does that serve the students today? I think that's a good one. Um, the idea that you can also have some harmony in so bring harmony to this system, this hairball, the bureaucracy. You don't have to burn bridges. You can find creative paths through the maze. So I love that. And then we've talked a lot about just building creative environments and thinking about like what are ways that we could break from the normal to do things that might spur some creativity. And so Gordon talks a lot about those things. And I think ultimately, you know, the the question is like, can if we adopted this orbiting the giant hairball idea, uh, let's try it. Because if we had more energy that we could focus on our students and spend less time or even be protected, like if you have a boss and you think that they'd be really interested in this, buy them the book and just let them read it, because the outcome of that is they will protect you. They will understand their role of protecting you and giving you space and also bringing you back in orbit or in, so you're not totally out of control. But I
Yeah,
hope,
I
I
think
don't
it's
know, Rachel, I hope this is helpful. We I you know I've been wanting to talk about it for a long time. That's what I got.
I think it's great. I think it's a great way to visualize both the messy part of our systems, um, and the way that we are connected to them, but then also this idea that we have some leeway with how we choose to do things. Because we're always saying like systems are designed to get what they get, and if you don't like what they're giving you, then you have to figure out how to either work outside of them, close to them, but outside of them, or go in and change them, which is a whole other conversation. But the idea that you have someone standing between you and this very complicated, messy thing, just frees you up to be able to do student success work, which is not clear cut, and it's not, there's not a prescription for it. You can't say, and then you do this and then students will be successful, right? It's very much
not a
about
spreadsheet that you can just update and that will tell you how many of different kinds of cards to put on the shelf.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. All right, Matt. Well, there is orbiting the giant hairball. Next week, we will have a conversation with Dr. Sherry Woosley. And then, you guys, Thanksgiving is like right around the corner. I think we only have 2 more episodes of Capping Down this semester. Matt, you and I have to pick a new theme and a new book for 2026. So we will get on that. I'm excited. I think we have some good possibilities. But always want to encourage our listeners. We see you. We know you're doing really good work. We get to talk to you about those things that you're doing every single day, and you are having an incredible impact on your students and in turn the world. So thank you for everything you're doing. Good to spend time with you. Have a great day.